So in the last video, we covered the first part of the chapter of thought discussion. And that part had to do with the situation where the received opinions, as Mill says, the things that most people believe are false. Right? That's one possibility when you're thinking of exerting some kind of pressure on people to stop expressing a view. It could be that they're right. And he goes through that argument at length, following out all the different possible responses he can think of to that idea. But, of course, there is another possibility, which is the received opinions are, in fact, true. Right? Or, to put another way, what if the view to be banned, and remember that we're not just talking about government bans here, I'm just saying banned to keep things simple. We're talking also about social pressure, boycotts, right? Social exclusion of people who hold certain views. What if the view to be banned is false? False, right? You might think, well, whether or not it should be banned, it's just a matter of whether or not it's true. We should be able to ban false speech, and we shouldn't ban true speech. Now, given the uncertainty Mill thinks we should have about whether or not a claim is true or false, maybe we should err on the side of caution, but clearly there will be some cases where a view is false. Right? It's not like we're uncertain about everything. That's just not true. There's lots of things that we have certainty about. And by certainty here, I don't mean the completely unreachable standard of there's no possibility that something is false. 100% chance, or that something is true or false. So sometimes people will, when arguing disingenuously, say that something is uncertain just because you can imagine some way it could be false, right? So this very often happens in cases where money's on the line, because normally you have to pay someone to make an argument this stupid. But people have done it, right? So when the first pressure started coming on tobacco companies to admit that cigarettes cause lung cancer, they would hire all sorts of second-rate, third-rate scientists to come up with studies that aimed to raise some doubt, right? Not much doubt, not any serious doubt, not any doubt sufficient to give anyone reason to reject the view that cigarettes cause cancer, but just so they could point to some study which, if it was right, which it probably wasn't, then maybe there was a chance that cigarettes didn't cause cancer. Okay. And now they do it with all sorts of other things. They do it with theory of evolution. They do it with climate change. The point here is that when you're dealing with the natural world, which we gain knowledge of through observation, you can't ever get total, complete, 100% chance that something is true or false, right? You can't ever get it to where it's literally impossible for a claim to be true or false, or for a claim to be false, let's say. That doesn't mean, though, that we haven't reached the highest degree of certainty that we should want. I mean, you could define certainty so that it means 100% chance of being true, and certainly false is 100% chance of being false, but then the term certainty has no function anymore because you can't ever use it. Or rather, the only places you can use it are in really simple math claims, logic, and like simple, stupid definitions. We're 100% sure that a horse is a mammal. Okay, congratulations. But on anything that will ever matter, anything that will ever be significant, since it's impossible to reach 100% certainty, you would be completely impractical to divide up all the claims into the certain, where by that you mean 100% certain, 100% chance of being true, and the uncertain, where you mean anything less than 100% certainty or anything less than 100% chance of being true. Because every claim that's interesting that you would ever want to debate is in the category of less than 100% likelihood of being true. So you're not really saying anything about a claim when you say it's not 100%, doesn't have a 100% chance of being true, other than this is an interesting claim. This is a claim that we can't prove true or false just by thinking about it for a second. That doesn't mean that it doesn't meet the highest reasonable standards. Right? You're an unreasonable person if you refuse to take a position, let's say, on something that the evidence shows has a 99.999% chance of being correct. That's not you being wise to, say, well, it's not for sure, so I'm not going to believe it. Yeah. No, that's you being silly. So when we're talking about any interesting claim, the threshold, the standard, just can't be 100% certainty. People who go by, or 100% chance of being true, people who live by that standard, I mean, no one has ever lived by that standard. Some people might think they live by that standard, but they don't, because they just refuse to take account of the fact that nothing they believe in has a 100% chance of being true. Right? When you, go to the store and then drive back home, right? You're assuming that you have a fridge to go put the stuff you bought in the store in. But of course, there's some chance, right, that while you were gone, somebody blew up your home, right? So are you really going to say, ooh, taking a risk here, don't know if my home's going to be here when I get back? No, that's not what you do, right? And if you lived your life worried about those kinds of things, you'd waste your whole life and you'd be dumb. So when I say some things are certain, what I mean is some things have such a high degree of probability that they're true that it is completely unreasonable and impractical to doubt in any way that they're true, to act in any way on such doubt. So for all practical purposes, you can just treat it as true. Not everything is such that there's any significant practical doubt about it. That said, the considerations that Mill brought up in the first part of this chapter should make you think that the class of uncertain true claims, rather, is wider than you might ordinarily think. Right? So maybe instead of being 50-50, it's 80-20 or something like that. But either way, there will still be some cases where it's not that reasonable to worry that the received view is false. And I'm going to use as an example here several times the case of whether the Earth is flat. Starting a few years ago, some celebrities of below average intelligence started claiming that they thought the world was flat. Maybe they did it for attention. Maybe they did it because they're dumb. I'm pretty sure Kyrie Irving did it because he's dumb. But there were some rappers, some basketball players, and then they said it because they'd seen a thing on YouTube once. But their saying it brought attention to the fact that there are actually tens of thousands of people out there who believe that the Earth is flat. And I'm going to be using these people as an example because this is a case where the view, if you were considering banning this view, which, I mean, I think you shouldn't, but if you were considering banning this view, you couldn't seriously, right, think that we're in this situation. The opinion to be banned may be true. That should be if. Here, I'm going to change this so it matches. And just say the opinion to be banned is false. And I'm going to use the flat Earth example in part because some of the two of the other examples I mentioned, evolution and climate change, while they are, I mean, there's just as much reason to believe in the theory of neo-Darwinian evolution and that climate change is being driven by emission of greenhouse gases. There's really just as much reason to believe that as there is that the Earth is not flat. That said, there's no interest groups, or there's no politically important interest groups devoted to casting uncertainty, or casting doubt rather, on the claim that evolution is true and that the Earth is warming because of greenhouse gases and that warming is causing changes to our climate. You have a group of people who are committed to a literal interpretation of the Bible, which if you take a religious studies course taught by a competent professor, you'll know is not the consensus or even dominant or even, a reasonable view to take of the Bible. And then you have fossil fuel companies that make money off of us continuing to emit greenhouse gases. And so they do the same thing the tobacco companies used to do. They hire people to come up with stupid studies. They hire second-rate scientists to come up with studies so that they can toss them out, so they can keep pumping the stuff into our atmosphere a little longer because they make money doing it. But no one makes money off of people believing that the Earth is a sphere or roughly spherical. It's not actually a perfect sphere. And I don't even mean like the mountains mean it's not smooth. I mean like it's a little wider in the middle than it should be if it were a sphere. But it's roughly spherical. It's certainly not flat. Nobody makes any money off of that, and nobody anymore has any religious convictions that the Earth is flat, except for this really small group of nitwits online. And I can take you to their website, and I will in this video. So here's the second possibility, and there's actually going to be a third. And the third is probably the more interesting one. The opinion to be banned. Move this over all the way. The opinion to be banned is partly true. So we have the three options. The opinion to be banned might be true. The opinion to be banned is false. The opinion to be banned is partly true. And you might even just say might be partly true. Right? I switched from might be to is to reflect the fact that while there are some things that we know to be true, there are some things we know to be false. There's this much bigger class of things that might be true, might be false. And we should err on the side of caution. So that's why we say might for or may be true for the first one. And then we only really consider the what to do in the case where the opinion is false when we really do know it to be false. Right? Like with flat Earth. Okay. So what reason could we have to not ban flat Earth theory? Well, one reason to not ban flat Earth theory is they're not hurting anyone, the people who push this idea. I mean, they're kind of hurting themselves in the sense that they have this massively idiotic view of the world. But nobody's going to die because they believe the Earth is flat. The way that people might die, right? Because, well, in fact, certainly many people are going to die because of the decades of misinformation that's been spread about climate change. And it's not, but also, so that's one thing. Sometimes accepting a view is the only way to save lives. And you can put there climate change is like that. Vaccines. So there's a debate about vaccines, which I almost used, but I do find a fair number of college students do have these views about vaccines, where vaccines are more harmful than pharmaceutical companies are saying, or they're part of some plot to, I believe the idea is they're part of some plot to stop people from having babies or something like that, some sort of racist plot. And I didn't use that as an example because I didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But of course, the derisive way I just talked about this, if you are one of these people who has these bizarre views about the danger of vaccines, your feelings are probably already hurt. But whatever. Lives are lost because of the propagation of views like that. But lives aren't lost because of the propagation of the view that the Earth is flat. Similarly, it's not clear at all that lives are lost because of the propagation of the view that evolution isn't true. That said, evolution is so central to how we understand so much of the world now. And by we, I mean the people who know what they're talking about. That putting evolution in doubt compromises a lot of stuff that we know about. It plays a major role in our understanding of the world. Lots and lots of stuff is based on it. Now, the world being flat doesn't have the same kind of significance. It's certainly true that if the world were actually flat, physics would have to be so different that, lots of what we believe is different. But it's not the case that like the claim that the earth isn't flat plays a role in like all of social science, right? The way that evolution is coming to play this like huge role in social science. But even in the case of the view that evolution isn't true or isn't the correct theory about where the species that are alive today come from, even then, I don't think anyone's seriously suggesting we ban it. Right? The debate is over whether we should teach it. The answer to that is yes. But when it comes to flat Earth, nobody dies. Nothing is upset. There's so few people who believe in it that is all by itself a reason not to ban it, right? Why ban crackpots who aren't doing any harm? But suppose someone still wanted to ban it. Suppose, you got a group of people together who said, no, we must eliminate this heresy about the shape of the earth. What reasons could Mill give for why you shouldn't ban it, even though it's not going to be a false claim? Or rather, even though it's clearly a false claim. Well, the reason is, and here we'll use red here. Discussing false views keeps true views vital. What Mill says is that even if a view is false, it's important to not ban it. It's important to not exert pressure to get rid of it. Social pressure, governmental pressure, any kind of pressure like that. Because if we get rid of all the false views, then the true view becomes what he calls a dead dogma. It becomes something that everyone says they believe, but no one really understands anymore because they've never had to defend it. They've never been taught the debate. And part of the reason I chose the earth being flat is that it's surprising, it's been surprising to me how many people who, of course, say what almost all of us say, that the earth is not flat. It's surprising how many people are just completely befuddled and baffled by the arguments that the flat earthers make. They make these arguments and then plenty of people are like, well, I don't know why your argument's wrong. I don't really know how to prove you wrong. What that suggests is, while probably all of you watching this video believe and know that the earth is not flat, you don't understand how you know? I mean, here's the way you know. Every authority has told you. And that is actually a perfectly good way to know lots of things. It's how most of us know everything. Right? Or it's how all of us know almost everything we know. And there are some people for whom it really is the only way they know anything they don't have personal experience of. We accept what authorities say. Like every historical belief you or I have, we have because we read it in some book. And we trust that the person who wrote the book was saying things that were true. Now, in the case of history, because that's the only kind of evidence we have this chain of reports going back to the original event. You can't really do much better than that, but in some cases you can, right? So a lot of us, and I'll include myself in this, have the scientific beliefs we do just because a science teacher told us at some point. We accept it on the basis of authority. Now, sometimes people walk around saying like, oh, you should never believe things just on the basis of authority, and those people are ridiculous. Of course you should believe things on the basis of authority. If you didn't, you would have almost no beliefs about anything in the world. The thing you should do is make sure the authorities you're trusting are good. What that means is you need to know that they went through the proper process to be declared an authority. The idea that you should never trust authorities, that you should never believe things on the basis of an authority, is incredibly foolish. But the idea that you should always be wary of someone who claims to be an authority, and you should check to make sure they have the right credentials, they have the right training, they've gone through the right process. That's very important, right? If you never accepted things, if you never came to believe things on the basis of what authorities told you, you wouldn't trust your doctor, right? Like your physician or your mechanic, right? because most of us don't know how the human body works. Most of us don't know how our cars work. Most of us don't know how our computers work. We trust authorities all the time. We do that because that's the only sensible way to live. But you need to make sure your doctor is a real doctor, right? You need to take a look at that diploma and make sure it's not from like some medical school on like some island that you've never heard of that has no laws, and so anyone can set up any medical school they want, right? If your physician got their medical degree from an online program that took a week to finish, well, then the problem isn't that they're an authority and you shouldn't believe things just on the basis of authority. The problem is they're not really an authority. So, when it comes to lots of scientific views, we accept and believe the things we believe on the basis of authority. But that very often leaves us in a position where we just don't understand what makes the claim we believe a true claim. And I'm going to use some of the arguments that the flat earthers use in order to make that point. Okay, so here we are at the webpage of the Flat Earth Society. It's not a great webpage, but you know, it's here and we can use it to figure out what they believe. All right, now you could go in the forum and talk with all the flat earth people, right? There are thousands of posts you could look at, many hundreds of topics in each one. And science and alternative science looks like that's a rager. Philosophy, religion, and society, I'm sure I'd find lots to be mad about in there. But let's go back. Let's go to the wiki, because they say that's a good place to start. All right. Let's talk about frequently asked questions. That's where they want you to begin. Right. And we here, encounter the standard Wikipedia page, although they've chosen a different font style, but the standard kind of layout, So we get to what is the Flat Earth Society. The Flat Earth Society is a group actively promoting the Flat Earth movement worldwide, descending from Samuel Shenton's International Flat Earth Research Society and the Universal Zetetic Society before it. We continue the age-old tradition of questioning the round earth doctrine and challenging authorities. Acknowledging the link between various unconventional beliefs, the society also engages in other controversial debates, striving to provide a voice for all free thinkers and zeticists. I have no idea what that is. Now, what evidence do you have? Let's go look at what they think is the best kind of evidence. We're going to ignore the very, very, very silly things they have to say about philosophy. That's the thing I'm an expert in. That's what my PhD is in. And I could take you through and just debunk all the philosophical things they say and show how foolish they are. But that wouldn't actually answer the question. This isn't a philosophical question, whether the earth is round. It's not the kind of question that a philosopher is, well-versed to answer. Now, we can contribute. We can help you understand what counts as good evidence. We can help you understand what is the nature of a scientific approach to the world and things like that. But we can't actually tell you what shape the earth is. Why? Because that's going to take actual experimental and observational evidence. They claim to have some. Let's look at what it is. The Bedford Level Experiment. So the Bedford Level Experiment was a series of observations carried out along a 6-mile length of the Old Bedford River on the Bedford Level, Norfolk, England. All right. So this was performed in the 1800s. And the idea was to find a stretch of water long enough that you could test whether the earth was flat or not. See, the idea is that if the earth was rounded, and if it was the approximate size that scientists said it was, then if you got a long enough stretch of ground that was flat, and of course water is going to be flatter than ground, it's going to make the measurements easier, so that's why they use water, then you could test. You could just test. Does this body of water curve away? Right? As it should. And so you can read this. Here's what they say. They say they made the observation, and they found that it didn't curve away. Right? So what you would expect to see is sort of the water stretch out ahead of you until it disappeared. right? Went over the horizon. And what they say is it doesn't do that, right? Now, almost every time I've ever presented this in class, right? And I've spent longer on it than I will in this video, but you can feel free to read this page, go to the Flat Earth Society, go to their Wikipedia page, read the page, and look at how the experiment is designed, look at what the reported results were. You can even, because this isn't a terribly sophisticated experiment technologically, you can even go perform it yourself in a way. Now, you do need some things that you wouldn't normally have, but whatever. Some tools that you wouldn't normally have. But when I've gone through this in class, I've described the experiment, I've described the results, and asked students, what do they think? And most students don't know how to respond. They don't actually change their mind. I've never converted anyone to being a flat earther, which is good because I don't want to, because the earth isn't flat. But most people who know, right, that the earth is round can't say why they know the earth is round, right? Or rather, they know that they believe it because authorities told them, but they don't understand how to rebut this experiment, how to show that this experiment is wrong. Now, a simple Google search of Bedford level experiment will reveal all sorts of ways. I mean, this is what we were just on here. The Bedford, the one I just highlighted, that's the Flat Earth Society one. But you can, there's a Scientific American article, there's the actual real Wikipedia page. There's all sorts of things you can do to find exactly why this experiment doesn't work, right? So if you do get curious, and sometimes I've had students say like, well, now I'm going to go look this up. You can find why the experiment doesn't show what flat earthers think it shows. However, I want you now to just pay attention to that feeling you have when you read through this page the first time. There's quite a lot here. And those of you who are science majors might be able to tell pretty quickly, like, well, this is just not the kind of evidence, this is not like the caliber of evidence that scientists, real scientists, use. And that might be your first reaction. Those of you who aren't well versed in the sciences might just be genuinely puzzled about how you respond to this. Like, well, if it's really 6 miles long and it's really completely flat the whole way, like, is the Earth really round? That feeling you have of being sure that you're right, but unable to say why, that's what Mill's getting at when he talks about something becoming a dead dogma. Now, you're in luck, both because of modern, communications technology, which allows for the internet. You can easily look up stuff to find out why the Bedford level experiment does not show the Earth is flat. However, you're lucky in another way, right? Because let's, for example, go here, right? This is an account in Scientific American. It's going to tell you about how the Bedford level experiment doesn't work. It's going to have part of that information here. But the reason we know why it doesn't work is precisely because of flat earthers. Right? Because flat earthers are here still saying this stuff, from time to time, people still go to the trouble of showing why they're wrong. Now, because these aren't altogether rational people, the flat earthers, they don't get convinced, right? If you go back to their main page, right, they have the conspiracy. Conspiracy theorists tend not to be people who change their mind when evidence is presented to them. Once you get to the point where you think there's a conspiracy to say that the Earth is round when it's actually flat, this has probably become such a part of your identity that it is emotionally very difficult for you to admit that the Earth is not flat. But that's not the test, right? The test of whether or not a view is true is not whether there's anyone who disagrees with it, right? The mere fact of disagreement does not show that there's more than one rational side on an issue, right? Sometimes people will say that. Sometimes people will say, well, In any case where there's disagreement, you have to show, right? You have to just teach the debate or show the debate. Journalists often say this thing, that just because there's disagreement, both sides need to be given a fair hearing. No, that's silly, right? For any question you have, you can find somebody who will irrationally take one of the answers of that question, or rationally believe one of the answers to that question. That doesn't make the question uncertain, right? It doesn't mean that there's a real live question here. But that said, if it weren't for flat earthers, people would not be writing these things, right? These articles that show why flat earth arguments are bad, right? Why is it that you can go online and find out about the experiments that convinced scientists that, and this goes back like thousands of years, that convinced early scientists that the earth was not flat? Well, part of the reason you can find it so easily is because there's a debate. This is Mill's point. Without the debate, without people actually being allowed to say what they believe, even if what they believe is absurd, even if what they believe can very easily be shown to be false, people won't actually go to the trouble of showing that it's false. And then over time, you get to the point where most people have forgotten why what's true is true. If you don't allow disagreement, people forget the basis or the bases of their beliefs. And in some cases, it's not a big deal. Like, it's not the end of the world if you don't understand the evidential basis for the claim that the earth is not flat. But think about other issues, because Mill's not primarily interested in scientific disagreements in this book. In fact, at several points, he makes pretty clear that when it comes to the sciences, as long as there was at some point where it was question was seriously investigated, if after that there's nobody left who pushes a view, he's kind of fine with it. Phlogiston, which I brought up in the previous video, he brings up in the second half of this chapter. And it does seem like he thinks it was very important that phlogiston versus oxygen as an explanation of fire and heat and things like that. It was very important that this debate was had once, but you don't need to keep the phlogiston theory alive in order to do that, right? But what about things that are of more immediate importance? What about questions about how we ought to live, right? How society ought to function? What about religious questions, right? When it comes to ethics and religion and politics, once something becomes a dead dogma, that's a real problem, right? That's not something that you can just sort of say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if we know why. If you're building your whole life around some religious view, or if you're building your entire society around a set of political views, or if you're living your life in accordance with certain ethical maxims, and then you just don't have any understanding of why they're true, even if they're true, that means you're basing your whole life on something that you don't have any comprehension of. And that's bad, Mill thinks. That's something we should all want to avoid. So one reason, and this is the main reason, basically, and he goes on at length about it, but it's fairly straightforward. One important reason to not ban or not socially pressure people to get rid of even false views, even views you're sure are false, is that once they're gone, once the people pushing the false views are gone, the people with the true views will forget why it's true. Which has two problems. I mean, one practical problem is then it makes it easier for the false view to make a comeback later, right? Part of the reason flat earth conspiracy theories are as popular as they are today is that I'm guessing nobody alive today in science class was walked through the evidence that the earth was round. Right? I know I wasn't. I was never taught in high school or middle school or anything like that what the Greeks did to figure out that the earth was round. And if you were thinking that this was Columbus who proved that the earth was round, no, everybody knew the earth was round well before Columbus. Columbus never had to disagree with anyone who knew how to read about whether the earth was round. Everybody knew the earth was round. Everyone literate in Europe at the time knew the earth was round. Maybe there were some peasants who thought the earth was flat, but that's it. And if you're thinking, well, I know how to prove the Earth isn't flat, you just fly around it. Well, have you ever actually done that? This is the kind of thing a flat earther would say. So, and if you have, well, yeah, then this is going to be for you a silly view. That you have direct knowledge is false. But part of the reason it made a comeback is none of us were taught the evidential basis for the claim that the Earth is round. And as a result, lots of people were able to be taken in by what were, on the surface, superficially convincing arguments. And what Mill points out is if you keep dispute and debate alive, that doesn't happen. But more importantly than that, more importantly than guarding the defenders of the truth against falsehood better, the fact that people who believe false views are still around means that everyone else has a better understanding of why they live the life they do, especially when it comes to these religious, ethical, and political disagreements. If we have ethical, religious, and political uniformity, you have a bunch of drones who live their life according to rules that they don't understand and they never think of, because to them, it just seems so obvious that why think about it? Right? Imagine if the principles you built your life around were for you the same as the view that the Earth is round, where all it takes is one Wikipedia page by a bunch of nitwits to make you go, oh, I don't know why. Now imagine if that were everything that was important to you, that all it took was a nitwit with a wiki page to make you go, well, I don't know why I believe in God, or I don't know why I think it's good to help, those who are suffering, or I don't know why we should have a democracy. Right? It's important to allow dispute even on issues you're certain you know the answer to. It's important to allow those disputes to continue, because otherwise people end up with empty, meaningless lives that they don't understand. Now that leaves us finally with the opinion to be banned is partly true. Now this is, according to Mill, probably the most common situation we're in, where it's not the case that received opinion is entirely false or that it's entirely true, but that received opinion, the things that the majority believes, is partly true, but the views expressed by the minority are also partly true. Well, here it's really clear what you're going to want to say, right? This situation sort of inherits all the reasons in the other two situations, right? If it's true, well, then you just want to know it, right? And you can't be sure that it doesn't contain some part of the truth unless you look into it. And if it is false, well, the fact that, and for the part of it that is false, well, that's still useful because it helps you understand the truth better. So we need to have freedom of discussion because it helps us understand the truth better, even if we already have the truth, or it makes the truth available to us when we don't already have it. And I want to point something out here before we stop, before I stop with this chapter and move on to the next one. Mill is here assuming that if you have sort of freedom of thought and freedom of expression, if you have not only laws that protect people from the state restricting freedom of discussion, but you also have sort of a society and culture which leaves people be, even if they have atypical views, he seems to think that that by itself will generate diversity of opinion, because it's really diversity of opinion that is doing the really important work here. It's diversity of opinion that causes the debates, and it's the debate that he thinks helps us understand the truth better and also get rid of false views that we didn't know were false. But what if just having the freedom of expression isn't enough to generate the diversity of opinion? So you need diversity of opinion. So you write diversity to get debate. And then you need debate to get, understanding of the truth. And Mill seems to think that freedom of expression, interpreted broadly, so that it's not just you're free from the government, locking you up if you say things that are unpopular, but you're also free from other people trying to exert social pressure on you. He seems to think that freedom of expression will by itself lead to diversity, and it's worth thinking about whether that's true. Whether freedom will always lead to a diversity of opinions. And it is a sort of fundamental liberal view that yes, it will. That when you leave people be, they're going to pursue lots of different approaches to things. If you allow a bunch of people their freedom, they're going to try a bunch of different approaches to the same problem, and that will allow you to figure out what the best approach is, because you'll be able to see everyone trying out all these different approaches. But what if there's a natural human tendency to conformity? What if just knowing that other people have a different view than you, and that most other people have that view, what if that by itself creates pressure, not pressure exerted consciously by anyone else? What if that produces pressure for you to conform? The question here is whether maybe we have to go farther than just freedom of expression. Maybe we have to purposely try to stimulate diversity, like to produce diversity of opinion, to counteract a natural tendency towards conformity. So here we get into a question about just, what is human nature? What are humans fundamentally like psychologically? Will we, when left to our own devices, naturally produce a diversity of opinions and a diversity of lifestyles and a diversity of views? Or do we actively have to try to promote that diversity in order to get the debate, in order to get the understanding of the truth? And this is a question that liberalism has faced ever since Mill. Right? Should society or the government actively intervene to promote diversity? Or should it just leave people alone and hope that the diversity takes care of itself? Because what Mill is basically arguing for in this chapter is that diversity of opinion is good. It's almost always good because it leads to debate, and debate is the only way we can get, we can improve our own views and understand fully the good views we already, or true views we already have. This question about whether we should just leave people alone and assume that diversity will result, or whether we should try to promote diversity, has been one of the big disputes in liberalism ever since Mill, really since before Mill. But Mill's position does seem to be just leave people alone and the diversity will take care of itself. All right, this is the last video on this chapter, chapter 2, so we'll move on to chapter 3 in the next one.